A Karen manager mocks me and refuses to hire me because of my disability, so I sue her and cause her company to shut down. So, a little background info. I'm a 24-year-old woman who was born with a rare genetic disorder called muscular dystrophy that affects my muscle development. As a result, I've been in a wheelchair my whole life, but that hasn't stopped me from living a full and productive life. I graduated with a degree in marketing and have always been a really hard worker. Recently, I was laid off from my previous job due to budget cuts. That was a tough blow, but I was determined to bounce back and find a new job as soon as possible. I started applying for positions at various marketing firms and was really excited when I was called in for an interview at a fairly large company in Melbourne, which was later closed down. The position seemed like a perfect fit for my skills and experience, and I was looking forward to the opportunity to work with a new team. Until things took a turn for the worst when I arrived at the interview and met with the manager, who we'll call Karen. Karen was a maybe 40-something-year-old woman. She had a sour expression on her face. She barely looked up from her desk when I walked into the room, and when she did, it was clear that she wasn't impressed by what she saw. "Take a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat down and tried to smile, but Karen didn't return the gesture. I thought nothing of it. She simply stared at me with a cold, hard gaze as if she was trying to size me up. "So, tell me about yourself," she said, tapping her pen against the desk. I took a deep breath and launched into my usual spiel about my education and work experience. I talked about my degree in marketing and my previous job where I'd worked for the past 3 years. I highlighted my skills and successes, trying to sell myself as the best candidate for the job. But Karen wasn't interested in hearing any of it. She interrupted me halfway through my pitch and fixed me with a hard stare. "Look, I'm not sure why you're wasting your time here," she said. "We're not looking for someone like you." I was taken aback by her comment and didn't know what to say. "Someone like me?" I repeated, feeling my cheeks flush with anger. "What do you mean by that?" Karen sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Well, you're disabled, aren't you?" she said, gesturing to my wheelchair. "And let's be honest, people like yourself are just not as talented as normal people. They're not as productive, and they can't handle the same workload. It's just a fact." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Well, Karen, that's not true at all. I'm just as qualified and capable as any other candidate. I have a degree and years of experience under my belt. I can handle anything, and to be quite frank, I don't want to work with your shitty company anymore." Karen rolled her eyes and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, don't try to pretend like you're just like everyone else. You're in a wheelchair, for God's sake. How are you even going to keep up with the rest of the team? Who are you kidding? How are you going to handle all the tasks and responsibilities that come with this job?" I was visibly frustrated and confused. Does she not know she can get sued for this? She really took an emotional toll on me and made me feel like crying. At this point, I couldn't hold back my anger any longer, so I rambled, "How dare you talk to me like that, you piece of shit? You'll regret this." Karen just sneered at me and shook her head, chuckled, and said, "My sincere apologies, miss, but I'm sorry, we're not interested in hiring someone like you. You just won't be a good fit. And no, we won't regret not hiring you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like, seriously, this was a new experience for me. I had never encountered such blatant disrespect before, but I was well aware of my rights as a human. So I just gathered my things and stormed out of the office of that shitty marketing firm, determined to take action and hold the sly bitch and her company accountable for their actions. I sought legal advice and decided to sue her and the company for discrimination under the Disability Discrimination Act. I hired a lawyer and started the process of building a case. I knew gathering evidence was crucial in this case. I needed to successfully prove that the piece of shit had discriminated against me because of my disability in order to have a successful case. So, I started by collecting any and all documentation related to the interview and piece of shit's comments. I took detailed notes on the conversation, including specific quotes and the tone in which they were said. I also reached out to any witnesses who may have overheard the conversation through the company's LinkedIn. I was able to secure written statements from a few of my fellow interviewees who had been in the room near us. My lawyer had advised me on the necessary steps to take in order to bring a successful case against Karen and the company. I filed a complaint with the Australian Human Rights Commission, which apparently investigates the matter and tries to facilitate a resolution through conciliation. Here comes the sweet justice, the day of the court case. This day was emotionally draining for me, as I had to confront the prejudice and discrimination I had experienced. I don't know, but this stuff just made me go into tears. But thankfully, I was consoled by my lawyer, who stood by me throughout the whole process. The court ruled in my favor and awarded me a significant amount of money in damages, close to a third of the salary I would have got working for their shitty company. Not only that, karma is definitely real, because a few weeks later, that shitty business was being investigated, probably because of me, and fell into a load of legal trouble for other sloppy, shady business practices and was later shut down. Anyways, fast forward a year, bullshit aside. I'm now employed and making a six-figure salary at a more reputable tech company here in Melbourne as a disabled individual. F you, Karen. Edit. A lot of you guys were asking what the company is called. I decided not to name it because I'd like to maintain anonymity, as there were a few news articles written on this company and my name was mentioned in them. Yo, I feel for the OP on this one. It's absolutely disgusting how this Karen lady treated her just because she's in a wheelchair. It's 2022, and people like Karen still exist. It's crazy. I'm glad the OP stood up for herself and let Karen know that she's just as qualified and capable as any other candidate. It's completely BS that Karen would try to use the OP's disability as an excuse not to hire her. I have no doubt that the OP would have been a fantastic addition to that team, and it's Karen's loss in her company. That's brutal for not giving her a chance. I'm glad OP is doing well now with her new job. A Karen on a plane tried to force me and my son out of our seats that I paid for because she didn't want to sit anywhere else. She freaked out. Here's what happened. So I have a son who's currently 2.5 years old, but we've been traveling by plane since he was 6 months old due to our living an 18-hour drive from my family. Parents, younger sibling, grandparents, etc. In the U.S., you generally don't need to buy a plane ticket for a child under 2 years old. You can buy a seat, like if you want to bring your baby in their carrier or just want to use a car seat. But they can also be considered a lap child and sit in your lap for free. When my son was about 1.5 years old, we were flying back to my hometown to go visit my family. We were flying on an airline named the opposite of Northeast. On this airline, an adult with a child under 6 years old gets to board right after the A1 10-ish boarding numbers and before the A11 60 or whatever it is, which was helpful for me to get me some extra time to find a seat and settle with my kid. Now, he was under 2, so he could have flown for free and sat in my lap. But after the flight we had taken a few months before that, where he was hell on wheels, I was mortified by how terrible we probably made our roommates' flights. I decided to buy him a plane ticket so he could have a little more room for our things. Diaper bag, toys to entertain him, snacks, juice, breast milk, blanket, etc. I hated to feel like I was inconveniencing other passengers with my child when I had to keep him to such a small, confined space to begin with. It was better to give him some extra room in the form of his own seat so as not to crowd others when he wanted to get out of my lap or try to look out the window, etc. Plus, then I could sit between him and provide a buffer for his wayward feet. He was generally, and still is, a really good little traveler. But every 1.5-year-old has their moments, as other parents can understand. I swear, I do my best to keep him under control. If you've never flown with a child under 2 as a lap child, you should know that when you go to check your bags at the airport, you get a normal boarding pass for yourself, as well as a boarding pass for the child that clearly says lap infant across the top of it. Otherwise, if you buy your child a ticket, they get a normal boarding pass like everybody else with your boarding group/number. This airline has rows of 3 seats on either side of a very narrow aisle. I tend to stick to the far back rows just in case I need to leave the seat with him when we're in the air, and also to try to put some distance between us and other passengers. So we board with family boarding. I grab 2 seats all the way in the very back row, shove all of our stuff into the seats, and go about trying to settle our things in. My son decides to sit in the seat by the window and was watching the ground crew do their thing. I was sitting in the middle seat beside him. The aisle seat was empty and the plane started to fill up. But again, we were at the very last row, so most people found a seat before they made it to us, or saw I had a kid with me and decided to sit elsewhere. Can't blame them. When the plane was about 3/4 full, I hear someone say, excuse me, in a rather snobby voice. I turned to see a woman, maybe 30s, I'm in my early 20s, with a little girl, maybe 7 to 8 years old. Before I could even respond, the entitled mother demands that I move to the aisle seat and take my son with me so that her daughter could sit by the window. I want to say that if my son was flying free and was a lap infant, I wouldn't have had an issue moving to the aisle seat to let this little girl sit by the window if the mom had asked me nicely. However, I had purchased 2 tickets with my own money, which isn't easy to swing when you're a single mom, and even if I moved to the aisle seat, my son would have the middle seat and she'd have to sit apart from her daughter. I was not going to be used as a babysitter for someone else's kid on a flight, even if I didn't have my own child to deal with. I tried to explain this to her. Went a little something like this. Oh, I would, but I bought 2 seats, and even if I move, there'd only be 1 seat open, so you might want to try somewhere else so you both can sit together. There were still entire rows that were empty on the plane at this point. EM, you're lying. He's clearly not even 2 yet, and under 2 they fly free and sit in your lap. Please move now. Yes, they can fly for free in your lap, but I specifically bought him his own ticket so he'd have his own seat and more room. There are several rows a bit further forward that are still empty and have window seats. Well, he's small. You should just hold him. My daughter wants to sit by the window, and I need to be in the last row, so just hold him so we can sit here. The very back row on the other side was taken up already. I'm really sorry, but no, we need the extra space. I bought and paid for the extra seat. I'm not going to give it up just because you feel entitled to the space. Our things are already settled and stowed away. At this point, EM is working herself up into a tizzy and has caught the attention of the older couple sitting across the aisle. The husband tries to tell the EM to just choose somewhere else to sit, but she snapped at him to mind his own business. Kinda hard inside such a small space. So when she turned her attention back to me, my now fussing child because the strange lady is yelling at mommy, the wife waved down one of the flight attendants who came over. And that went along these lines. Flight attendant, hello, are we all okay over here? No. This girl refuses to put her son in her lap to make room for us, even though he's clearly less than 2 and can fit in her lap. Flight attendant turning to me. Ma'am, is your child a lap infant? Yes, he's less than 2 years old. EM. See, I told you, make her move. But I did purchase him a ticket because I knew he would appreciate having some extra space to get out of my lap. I had grabbed both of our normal paying customer boarding passes and handed them to the flight attendant. See? That doesn't prove anything. They give boarding passes for lap infants. The flight attendant then turns back to EM. Yes, they do give boarding passes for lap infants, but this is not a lap infant boarding pass. So I'm sorry, but she paid for that seat and there's no assigned seating, so you can't ask her to move. EM started going crazy, screaming at me and the flight attendant. Her kid's crying, but I think it may have been more out of embarrassment than that the flight attendant was telling them no. Anyways, the flight attendant ended up threatening to have her removed from the plane by air marshals if she didn't find a different seat. EM huffed angrily, promised to write a terrible review, and told the FAA specifically she was going to call opposite of Northeast Airlines corporate office and have her fired for treating EM and her daughter so poorly. The daughter did get her window seat further up the plane. The flight attendant rolled her eyes where only I and the older couple could see, and she apologized for you. The rest of the flight went smoothly. My kid laughed when the plane took off and then passed out in his own seat with his head on my leg about 20 minutes into the flight and slept the whole time. And the flight attendant gave me a complimentary glass of wine once he was asleep. I told the pilots at the end of the flight how wonderful she is. I saw EM inside the airport afterwards as we made our way to baggage, berating a cleaning staff member because the airport Burger King was closed at 11:30 p.m. As if the poor staff member even had control over that to begin with. I pointed a TSA person towards them and went on my merry way to see my not-so-babysitter. I totally feel for the OP in this story. It's a tough situation to be in when you're flying with a young child and trying to make everyone comfortable, especially when you've paid for a separate seat for your child. It's totally not cool that this woman just assumed that the OP would be okay with moving and making her kid sit in a lap just so her daughter could sit by the window. It's not like the OP was taking up 3 seats or anything. They were just trying to make the most of the space they had. And even if the OP's son was a lap infant, it's still not okay for this woman to just demand that they move. I can understand if she had asked nicely, but the entitled attitude she had was just unacceptable. You know what else is unacceptable? The video on the left, where a Karen demands a free yacht ride on OP's dad's yacht and tries to act like the owner's friend, so OP plays along and humiliates her. You don't want to miss this one.